Welcome to the Better Behavior Show with Dr. Nicole Beurkens, best-selling author, psychologist, nutritionist, and mom, where we'll be discussing ways to improve your child's attention, anxiety, mood, and behavior with simple strategies you can use right now. The following discussion is for educational purposes only and not intended to diagnose or treat any disorder. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking with your doctor. Now, let's head to the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, I'm answering a question from a listener. I get so many questions each week, and this is a great way to provide answers that many of you might find helpful. If you have a question you'd like me to consider answering on a future episode, email it to support@drbeurkens.com, and you just might hear it on an upcoming show. Now, on to today's question, which comes from Audrey. She writes, "My son is 6 and has been diagnosed with ADHD. We struggle with managing his impulsive and disrespectful behavior sometimes at home. His pediatrician says we should use more rewards and punishments, and specifically told me to use exercise as a consequence or punishment when he does inappropriate things, like make him do push-ups, run up and down the stairs, jumping jacks, those kinds of things. Something about that just seems off to me, but maybe it is the best thing to do. What do you think?" Audrey, these are great questions. And first of all, before I answer the question and get to the issues involved, I want to say good for you for checking in with yourself about a recommendation that you got from a professional. Too often, parents get recommendations or suggestions, especially when it's from a professional, particularly a medical professional, and feel like that's what they have to do, and it's not okay to ask questions or to check in with yourself about whether that feels right to you. So I want to commend you for that. For all parents, it's really important when a professional makes a recommendation, no matter how many degrees they have, how much experience they have, whatever the case may be, for you to check in with yourself and say, does this feel right? Does this ring true? Does this align with my beliefs about parenting, about my child, about what would be helpful here? What does my gut tell me about that? That's really, really important because, professionals can make lots of suggestions and they may not be the best thing for you or for your child. So, Audrey, good for you for questioning, for pausing and saying, let me check in with myself about this and let me ask more questions. Okay. So now let's get to the big picture issue here, which is around what are the best types of strategies to support kids with ADHD in terms of regulating their emotions and behaviors, because that's what you're really talking about here. You have a son who tends to be impulsive, he's disrespectful, he's doing some acting out in ways that feel inappropriate or frustrating, and you're looking at how to address that. So this is a common thing that comes up with kids with ADHD, with kids with a whole wide range of neurodevelopmental and mental health kinds of issues. And it's long been sort of thought or touted that the idea, what we need to be focused on here is really managing behavior, that we need to focus on the behavior itself, and we need these systems in place like rewards and punishments that will get to the root of this, that will just get a kid to finally learn what is the right way to act and what is the wrong way to act. And so there's a lot that's been written. There certainly are studies that have been done showing that reward and punishment-based systems can be effective for helping kids behave a certain way or exhibit certain skills. And certainly behavior management systems like that can be helpful in some situations. But here's the concern that I have with that approach is that it assumes that the primary problem is that the child knows exactly what they need to do, what they should do, and how to do it, and just isn't. So let me say that again. It assumes that the real problem here is that this kid knows exactly how to respond to the situation and what the adult, wants to have happen, and they have the skills to do it, and they're just choosing not to. And the problem with that is that it tends to really not be true. Again, it assumes the problem is motivation to do the correct thing. If I use a rewards and punishment-based system, I'm assuming that the real problem here is that the kid just needs enough motivation to make the right choice. That's not true the vast majority of the time in my experience, both with typically developing kids as well as kids with brain-based kinds of challenges. And we need to go back to the way of thinking that I have talked about on many different episodes over the last couple of years, which is this idea that kids do well if they can, which means that, of course, kids want to do the right thing. Why wouldn't they? It makes their life easier. It makes our life easier. They want to please us. When kids know what's expected and they have the skills needed to manage and respond to a situation in the quote unquote appropriate or right way, they do. The issue is not that we have all these kids with, ADHD and other issues, running around in the world who know exactly how they're supposed to do things and what they should do, and they're just not doing it because they're not motivated. That's just not true. So we need to go beyond this traditional idea of rewards and punishments and really instead look at what are the proactive strategies that we can use. How can we modify the environment? How can we use ourselves differently in these situations? And how can we teach the skills that are missing that are really leading to them having these challenges with managing their emotions and their behaviors? Teaching skills like how to stop yourself from doing something or saying something, things like listening comprehension skills, strengthening working memory, being able to tolerate and calm yourself when you're having uncomfortable feelings. These are all skills. Kids don't just, these don't just magically appear for them. These are skills to develop. And these are areas that we know tend to not be strengths for kids with ADHD and related kinds of issues. So we want to be thinking more about how can we proactively manage the environment and how can we teach skills. Now, let's get into some specific strategies and let's talk about movement, since Audrey mentioned the pediatrician suggested using exercise as a punishment or a consequence for inappropriate behavior. I think movement is a great tool to use to help support regulation for kids, but I would never use it in a punishment or a consequence kind of way. So what's being suggested here is that the parents say, oh, you made the wrong choice, or you disobeyed, or, you got in trouble, or you didn't follow my direction. So now, you need to run up and down the stairs 20 times as a punishment so that hopefully you'll think twice about that again and you'll do the right thing next time. Well, I find that very unhelpful and very inappropriate. Instead, we want to use movement in a proactive way. We know that structured movement, so not just chaotic, running around, but structured movement, things like, maybe it is running up and down stairs or going for a walk or doing an obstacle course or jumping on the trampoline. Movement with some boundaries to it is very, very regulating for the brain, particularly in children and particularly in children who have neurodevelopmental kinds of challenges. So let's use movement as a regulating tool for kids in a proactive way. So if we have this child who is really impulsive and struggling with regulating emotions and behaviors, let's make sure we're building enough movement into the day. Let's make sure this kid is having opportunities to get outside and be active, to have structured movement inside. Let's build those opportunities in order to support their ability to rein in their impulses, to manage themselves better. So yeah, let's use movement, but in a proactive way. Now, maybe a kiddo has, a falling apart moment. Maybe they've had a meltdown. Maybe they have, not managed themselves well. Maybe they're just kind of in a funk, just kind of moody, being real kind of, snippy and disrespectful. Let's use movement then as a positive tool to support them getting back on track, not as a negative punishment. So instead of, you're being moody and disrespectful to me, that's not appropriate, drop on the floor and give me 50 push-ups as a punishment. No, let's instead say, I noticed you're kind of prickly, it seems like, you're not feeling so great, just kind of struggling right now. Let's go outside and take a walk, or why don't you hop on your bike, or, why don't you go downstairs and do Wii bowling for a little bit, or whatever it is, to use it as a tool that we help model for them how they can then use movement to help themselves when they are not feeling so great, when they are struggling to regulate themselves. So yes, we want to use movement in a proactive and regulating type of way, not as a punishment. Some other proactive strategies, again, thinking about getting to the root of what's really going on here, which is difficulty with processing and regulating emotions and behavioral responses and needing some skill development. I like to use a previewing strategy. I'm sure for Audrey and for any of you that have kids with these challenges, you're real aware of the types of situations that are likely to bring about problems with impulsivity, with, regulating behaviors, those types of things. So you can start to be proactive and preview some of those things even before they happen. We're going to be doing this in a little while. We're going to be doing XYZ type of thing in a little while. Let's walk through what that might look like. Let's walk through how you might feel. Let's think about, if you're getting overwhelmed, what are some things that you can do? What are some ways that I can help you if that's happening? And so you preview that. And you're helping the child to think through ahead of time what that might be like and what they can do so that you and they are more prepared in the moment if and when that happens. So that previewing strategy, very, very powerful. And that can be done well in advance and reviewed, several times before the upcoming event or situation, or you can do it right before. Oh, you're getting ready to head outside with the friends from the neighborhood. Let's think about how that might go. Oh, I remember last time, this happened. Yeah, that can be tough. Boy, if that happens again, let's think about how that's going to feel. Let's talk about what it is that you can do. And this can be a pretty quick kind of preview, but that can really, really be helpful in sort of slowing them down, getting them to think about that, and then being better prepared and more ready for it if it does happen. So that's an example of a helpful proactive strategy that actually works on the skill development that's needed here. And then we've got things like giving time warnings. Again, if you know that your child tends to be really resistive or struggle with transitions, giving some time warnings, that's a really basic but helpful strategy to sort of let them warm up to the idea of a transition, of stopping one thing, of starting another thing, or, we're going to be getting ready to go in this amount of time, and kind of do a countdown. It helps them prepare. It helps them have some processing time to regulate themselves around that. Some other tools, things like making sure that we're communicating effectively what's going to happen or what the expectation is. So with a child with ADHD who tends to be pretty impulsive and dysregulated, instead of just giving instructions or letting them know something and hoping that they catch that, which they probably won't, to say, let me be more intentional about my communication here. Let me get down on my child's level if they're young and they're small, or let me physically get closer to my child and stop and wait for them to shift their attention to me. So I know that they're now thinking about what it is that I'm about to communicate. They're tuned into me. They're aware. Maybe that's putting a hand on the shoulder, wait for them to orient you, to stop what they're doing and put their attention on you. Then you tell them what it is that you want to tell them. Maybe it's what they need to do in that moment, or you're giving them information about something, but that's something that we can control and do on our end to make sure that we're communicating effectively so that they have the message. So stop, get down on their level or get closer to them, wait for them to turn their attention to you, then deliver the information, and maybe even say, tell me what you heard me say, or let's do a check here. What are the 2 things I asked you to do? Or what's the thing I told you is going to happen in 5 minutes? So you're checking to make sure, was the message received? And a lot of these kids, the reason everything seems to be so chaotic for them, or they seem so resistive or disobedient in the moment, is because they didn't really process what was happening leading up to it. They didn't really pay attention to or make sense of the instruction that they were given, or the expectation, or the time constraint, or whatever it might be. So these are simple but really effective communication tools that we can use. Another proactive strategy, making sure we're giving them some processing time with things, not expecting them to respond immediately. Sometimes I hear parents using these countdown kinds of techniques. I'm going to count to 3, or I'm going to start at 3 and count to 1, and you need to do, what I say by then. Well, for many kids, that does not leave enough processing time for them to make sense of what it is that they're supposed to be doing, and then also manage the big feelings that may come up for them with that. So we need to be, thinking about leaving that processing time. So those are just some examples of those proactive strategies that we can use that not only help smooth the way for these types of things to go better for them, but also start to help teach the skills and the regulatory capabilities that are really lacking here. Other skills that we can work on, things like how to stop yourself mid-action. You have an idea, or you have an impulse to act, maybe to reach out and hit your sister, or to, run away or whatever. How do we practice slowing down and stopping ourselves? That space between I have a thought and I act on it, and really practicing that. And we could do a whole nother episode on that. But, that's an example of a skill that often needs to be taught to these kids. How to manage big feelings that come up. These kids often just get totally overwhelmed by uncomfortable feelings, whether it's embarrassment or shame or frustration or hurt or, whatever it might be. Those can be difficult for any kid to manage, but especially if you have a child with a neurodevelopmental or mental health issue, they can really just get knocked over quickly by those big feelings. And then they act out as a result. And let me tell you, all of the punishing push-ups in the world after an episode of them, blowing up because of uncomfortable feelings, it's not going to teach them how to understand and regulate those big feelings the next time. So we need to work on the skills for that. So, hopefully that is helping you see that there's a lot more to these situations with kids than just, they're not motivated to do the right thing here. Now, if a challenge arises, okay, Audrey, or any of the rest of you, you're in a situation, you're using these proactive strategies, your child does react in a very big way or a disrespectful way, or there's impulsive behavior. Okay, then you slow down, you stay with them, you keep yourself calm, you stay with them until they're calm, and then you talk about what could be done differently. You work on talking through, reviewing what happened. Wow, you were feeling really mad about that. And then here's what happened. And then this is what I did. And that was really tough. Let's talk about, here's a way that I could help you with that next time. Or here's something that you could do next time. We're doing, again, the reviewing of it and the teaching on the back end of that. Much more effective than, giving some kind of consequence or punishment on the back end of that. It's helping them through that period of dysregulation, which teaches them, we're a model for them during those times of how to stay calm and regulated during those situations. So there's teaching happening there. And then there's teaching on the back end of, oh man, that was tough. Let's think about how we could approach that differently. And there's teaching there too. So that's really where we want our focus to be, is on identifying what are the real issues going on here. And then how do we teach the skills? How do we model the things that are needed? And move away from this just idea that motivation is the problem and we need to do rewards and punishments. And again, rewards can be really helpful for certain things. We can all use a little bit of reward-based motivation for certain things in our life, right? So I'm not saying that that's never the approach to take. But when we're talking about these kinds of things with kids with brain-based challenges, it's much more effective and appropriate and important in the short and the long term to take this approach of really identifying what are the missing skills, what's really happening here, and then how do we help them develop and strengthen the skills that they need to manage big feelings and to respond to things that happen in life more appropriately. So I hope this is helpful for Audrey and for any of you who have been wondering about the best way to support a child with ADHD or related types of issues. Remember, if you have a question you'd like to hear answered on a future show, email it to support@drbeurkens.com. You can put podcast question in the subject line. That'll help my team sort through that. And we'd love to hear from you and maybe answer those questions on a future episode. Thank you, as always, for listening, and I will catch you back here next time. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you for listening to this podcast. Creating these episodes has become one of my favorite things to do each week, and I love getting the positive feedback from so many of you about how much you benefit from the information. If you enjoy the show, I'd like to ask for your support. Please take a few seconds to scroll down to the ratings and reviews section of the show page on Apple Podcasts. You can leave 5 stars and a few words about why you enjoy the show. This will help other parents, caregivers, and professionals find the show more easily. And feel free to share episodes with friends, family members, and others who can benefit. If you haven't already, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for being a valued listener and for your ongoing support of the Better Behavior Show.
Thank you for listening to the Better Behavior Show with Dr. Nicole Beurkens. Leave a review on iTunes and share this episode with your friends. Visit drbeurkens.com to ask any questions for an upcoming episode, post comments for today's show, and sign up to receive weekly updates. That's drbeurkens.com.